John Reckenthaler of Morningstar begins his article about Social Security reform with the line, "The two big myths of Social Security reform are 1, balancing Social Security's books is necessary, and 2, if attempted, such a task would be difficult." Today, we want to start by understanding the mechanisms of the Social Security Trust Fund.
If there's one thing that's really scintillating to talk about, it's Social Security. And if there's another thing, it's actuarial calculations about the health of Social Security. So today, you get to hear both from our esteemed expert, Austin McLaughlin, on these topics. So we get to dive in. It's going to be fun today, Austin.
It is going to be so fun. One thing that you don't know about me, Spencer, is that when I was 18 and a freshman at the University of Tennessee, I wanted to study statistics. And I talked to a friend from high school and he said, "What kind of a job would you get with a degree in statistics?" Well, I didn't study statistics for college, but now I get to dive in deeply to what just satisfies my nerd brain so much. The Social Security Trust Fund and funding, government documents. Wow. Oh, it's so fun. So if you're retired today and you generate most of your income from Social Security, the reality of the headlines that you might see that says Social Security is going away, or it's going to be cut 20%. These are things that are really visceral, because if most of your income for lifestyle and living in retirement is based on Social Security, and you're hearing that it's going away, there's going to be a whole lot of fear, especially knowing that many Americans haven't saved for retirement. So Social Security, the trust fund, what's happening to it? These are really important questions to be asking. And so what we want to do today is really pull back some of those layers of, okay, what is the Social Security Trust Fund? Where is it going? And why is it problematic? And then in our next episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about levers that can be pulled to rescue Social Security, quote unquote. Now, the reality here is we have no control over this. And the controls that we could have had needed to be done 30 and 40 years ago. But we'll get to that here in a little bit. So we're going to start off with just the primary question of why is Social Security bleeding money? And the reality here is we need to start with the basic accounting framework and premise. And in a basic accounting, you think about any budget from any individual, any family, any company. On one side, you have money coming in. On the other side, you have money going out. If you have more money coming in than you have money going out, you're in a good spot. But if you have more money going out than you have money coming in, then you need to make some changes. And right now, Social Security is paying out more than they're bringing in. And so that's the inherent problem with the trust fund, is you have not enough money coming in to pay the benefits of those receiving income from Social Security. And so let's just take a look at the solvency of the Social Security Administration currently. And so the income sources. Social Security has really one primary source of income. It's the FICA tax. FICA stands for Federal Insurance Contribution Acts. It's the tax levied oftentimes equally between employer and employee. If you're self-employed, you get to pay both sides. You're a lucky man. But if you are employed by an employer, half of it's going to be paid by your employer, half of it's paid by you. So that's 12.4% that goes into the Social Security Trust Fund. 6.2% paid by employee, 6.2% paid by employer. And that's only on wages in 2024 up to $168,600. And so if you make more than that, once you make more, let's say you fill up that $168,600 by, let's say, June, then it's going to feel like you get a pay bump because you don't have to pay on the rest of those wages. So the Medicare Trust Fund on the other side is 2.9%, again, split evenly between employer and employee, 1.45% to the employee, 1.45% to the employer, and that's on all wages. Now, if you earn over $200,000 as an individual, $250,000 for married filing joint, then there's an additional 0.9% that's taxed onto that for funding the Affordable Care Act. So that's kind of where the majority of that income for Social Security comes from. In 2022, the payroll tax received about $945 billion. So a lot of money that's coming in to fund Social Security. Now, they also received about $47 billion from earnings paid by non-residents. So immigrants that come in, they still have to pay Social Security tax, even if they are never going to receive the benefit from it. So they paid in $47 billion. Additionally, there was $63 billion in interest that was received. Now, there's a misnomer here on the interest, and let's take a look at that. So the interest is every investment in the Social Security Trust Fund is put into a non-marketable U.S. government issuance. So what does that mean? Non-marketable. It can't be bought and sold on the U.S. government. A U.S. government issuance, it's a treasury bond. So essentially what we're doing here with these investments in the U.S. in the Social Security Trust Fund is it's one arm of the U.S. government promising to pay another arm of the U.S. government. So it's really just a promissory note, if you can think about it that way. Each of the bonds are bought, I believe, on June 30th. So there's a fixed interest rate, but it's just, again, one arm of the government promising to pay the other arm of the government, because you're not actually investing this in some other security that can be bought and sold on the open market. And so when we think about this, that is where the Social Security Trust Fund really is. You've got these income sources added together, as well as some other minuscule line items. The total income for 2022 was just over $1 trillion. So then let's look at the expense side of things. Monthly benefits that are paid out was about $1.093 trillion, and administrative costs ran about $4 billion. So if you look at that, we have $1.056 trillion coming in against a little bit more than that going out. You got $41 billion of a deficit every year that's coming out. And so there is a net loss every year. And that has been the case since 2010. So from 1984 until 2009, there was a surplus every year. So Social Security brought in more money than it was going out. And this is really due to the fact that during that period of time, baby boomers were in their years of peak earnings.
So what about baby boomers being in their peak earnings years? What's important about that?
Okay, so let's think about it in this way. How is Social Security funded? It's income coming in. Well, a couple things that we know about baby boomers, especially during that period of time. There were a lot of them. There are a lot of them. And so when the silent generation came back from World War II, the fertility rate from 1947 to 1964 was over 3. So that means for every one mother, there were 3 babies being born. So you have, and so that means for a family unit, if you've got 2 parents and 3 kids, that means when they reach that age where they're in their peak earnings years, you have 3 children paying for 2 benefits. And so the reality is, for a period of time, that was 3.5. And that entire average from 1947 to 64, there was an average of 3.37 children being born per mother. So you have people coming in to the system that are being born at a higher rate than they are currently being born. From 1970 to 1989, that average dropped to 1.87. So now we don't have as many people that are going to be in their peak earnings years. 1999 to 2010, that average increased back up to 2. But right now, we're not replacing workers at the same rate. And so when you think about this, if you've got 3.5 people per beneficiary, then you've got more people paying into the system, and you've got more people paying in during their peak earnings years. So that period of 1984 to 2009, you've got baby boomers that are both, there's more of them than beneficiaries, and they're earning more, so they're able to push more into the Social Security Trust Funds over that time. And so it's really, the equation is based on, again, income and expenses. So when you've got more money coming in because you've got more workers, then that ratio is going to help you. So from 1980 to 2000, when those people that were born from 1940 to 1960, there were 3.3 workers per each Social Security beneficiary. So you've got a whole lot more people paying into the system than you do receiving benefit from the system. So that's why this is really important. And you kind of imagine this like a seesaw. And there really needs to be a balance of, again, money coming in, money going out, which means there needs to be enough people paying into the system as benefits coming out. And so as we see fertility dropping, it doesn't affect Social Security immediately. It affects it 20, 30, 40 years down the line, when those people need to be in their peak earnings years pushing money into Social Security, into those trust funds.
So we've got a couple of inflection points here. In 2010 was the first year that we had less coming in from actual receipts of people paying into the system than we had going out. We still had this trust fund, this accounting mechanism where we had some interest coming in. And so it was several years after that that the trust fund, the actual dollar values started to go down, right? Because that interest, again, which is just, rearranging IOUs from one part of the house to another part of the house. I mean, you'd hate to compare this to something like Dumb and Dumber, Lloyd and Harry just having this big, case of IOUs. But sometimes that's how it feels like the government is, and that they're basically saying, well, we're making promises over here, we're making promises over here. At the end of the day, we had more income coming in, and so we used it some other places.
Right.
It wasn't as though it actually went into some kind of airtight case that we could then redeem down the road. It's just under the overall superstructure of the U.S. government.
Right.
So it was the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense, the Department of Education that are using this all along the way.
Right.
While we still have a deficit within the government overall. But the way that the law was passed was such that we're going to account this differently than it's going to be a subcategory of the government's budget that has to be reconciled in and of itself. Unless we pass some other laws.
Exactly.
So how does all that impact what we see income, expense, and where that's headed?
Yeah, so exactly to your point. That's the really crucial piece that I think is missed. It's like you were saying, funds weren't pushed into Fort Knox and just parked there while they generated interest. They were paid out to other departments. So Social Security has been running a net loss since 2010. But there has been a runway where the government has said we will continue to make good on our promises of those investments, the non-marketable securities, until that interest runs out. You're still having money come in. So that's why that interest is pushed out longer and longer, because the trust fund typically, you're still making money, bringing funds in. And so it's just a slow bleed out. But there is no money in the trust fund. So it's a government promise that we're going to make good on those promissory notes until they run out.
Right. And so we've got a couple $100 billion until they run out. And every deficit every year is going to get a little bit worse because we have more and more baby boomers retiring. So that $41 billion that we were in the red then becomes 43 or 48 or 52 or whatever it might be. And heaven forbid we actually have a recession and our legislators say, well, we need to cut the payroll tax because that's actually going to cut that $1 trillion of income, which we've done a couple times here in the past. So I think in particular, the events surrounding the global financial crisis, legislators in Washington, D.C. said, hey, we need to give the working class folks a break. We're going to reduce the payroll tax. Well, that's all well and good until you realize, okay, if you go from $1 trillion down to $800 billion and you only had $200 billion to begin with over here in this trust fund, well, now we've got the crossover line. Instead of it being 2032, then it ends up being like 2026. So we don't have a long runway to begin with, and there are circumstances that could push that even less. So what do we make of all of this?
So the reality is Social Security is not going away. When those trust funds are depleted, as of the 2022 or 2023 Social Security Trust Fund report that's put out every year in late March, early April, 2024's has not been released yet. So we're basing all this on numbers in 2023. Those non-marketable bonds, the interest on those runs out in 2033. So when you hear the trust fund is depleted, it's those promises to pay run out in 2033. That does not mean that Social Security goes away. The way that the Social Security law is actually written is then it just has to be whatever money is coming in must equal what is going out. And so right now it's about a 20% haircut. There's not enough money coming in to then pay for the benefits going out. And so the federal government has to look and say, what is our projection for income, and then we are going to reduce benefits by what we know is going out and what we project to go out this year. So there is not the same mechanism that says, well, DOD ran a $1 million surplus, so we're going to pull $1 million. That's how Social Security has worked, is that when Social Security had that surplus, the other arms of the government were like, great, we've got money to spend.
Right.
And so the money went out. It's not the same with Social Security. Once that money runs out, benefits get cut. DOD, DOE, the Department of Education, they're not helping fund Social Security, unlike when Social Security helped fund them.
Right.
And so the reality is there is an expectation that something will be done. And we'll cover that in the next episode. But that's what's going to happen, is if the Congress does nothing, if our government does nothing, if we keep spending like drunken sailors, if we don't make any changes, then in 2033, benefits are going to cut 20%. And we don't want that to happen. But that's the reality of where we are.
Really, our message is we don't expect that to happen. We don't expect Social Security benefits to be cut. If you look at any kind of survey that's out there in terms of who votes, it's retirees that vote in a much higher percentage than younger counterparts. So politicians are not going to be cutting benefits from our view anytime soon. There are other levers that can be pulled. We'll talk about that next time. But whether it is increasing the payroll tax, whether it's including more of income in the payroll tax, whether it is deferring Social Security's full retirement age a year or more years, for younger folks, lots of different things can be done. Our opinion is that the sooner that they can be done, the better, because it gives everyone more time to plan, and it takes some of the difficulty really out of that process where we see the trust fund being depleted.
So Spencer, we come back to Reckenthaler's quotes at the very beginning. And again, he said the two biggest myths of Social Security are that one, balancing the books is necessary, and two, if attempted, such a task would be difficult. Well, we've looked through the first of those. Next week, we'll look at why the task actually isn't that difficult. We just need to do it. If you like these financial planning videos, please share it with a friend. And if you have questions, go to our website at SeriousRetirement.com. This content was provided by Retirement Planning Services. We are located in Knoxville, Tennessee. You can visit our website at SeriousRetirement.com. The information in this recording is intended for general educational and informational purposes only, and should not be construed as investment advisory, financial planning, legal, tax, or other professional advice based on your specific situation. Please consult with your professional advisor before taking any action based on its contents. Advisory services offered through Retirement Planning Services, LLC.